Hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin. Today, I'm very excited to introduce you to Debby Applegate. Debbie is an American historian and biographer. She's the author of The Most Famous Man in America, the biography of Henry Ward Beecher, for which she won the 2007 Pulitzer Prize for biography or autobiography. Her latest book is Madam, the biography of Polly Adler, icon of the jazz age. Debby Applegate, welcome to Uncorking a Story.
Thanks so much for having me here, Mike. I couldn't be more pleased.
Well, I couldn't be more pleased either. I always start off with the same question for everybody, which is, Debbie, where does your story as a writer begin?
Well, I'm not really a writer. I'm a reader who got sucked in and now finds myself incapable of doing anything else. I have unfitted myself for all other work. That's the problem. I loved reading as a kid. I was good at, I guess, sometimes when you're good at things, you find yourself doing them, whether they are the right thing or not. And I was good at reading, and I read all the time, in a kind of escapist way. And I think that what it meant was, like they say, those 10,000 hours. I may or may not have put in my 10,000 hours as a writer, but I certainly have as a reader. And what I have as a writer, I think, is the sound, how books are supposed to sound, how paragraphs are supposed to flow and sentences are supposed to flow in the way of somebody who has practiced music, since they were little. And I'm actually a terrible proofreader. I think my spelling actually has gotten worse over time, and I'm a terrible typist. So that it's really the sound. I know what books sound like, and I think that comes from just having read all the time. And I am still an obsessive reader, although I have gotten out of books lately, reading books, because I was always working on this silly biography. So I was reading all the time professionally. I think my only hobby right this second is reading the New York Times, which I waste a tremendous amount of time every day reading the paper.
Well, I wouldn't call it wasted time, but what were you into as a kid when you were kind of growing up? What were you reading back in those days?
Oh, I would read anything. My husband's a big fan of the old Odd Couple TV show, and he always cites me as like Oscar, who will read the back of a toothpaste tube if there is nothing else around me. I mean, everything. I think the thing that I enjoy the most in a way is essays. I love the arc of a good essay, and it's maybe what I'm best at in terms of writing. As a kid, I read tons of fiction, but like a lot of people, I think as I grew older, I became more interested in reality, although I have been trying to read more fiction. The other thing that I always liked, even from the time when I was very young, and still is true, is I like old stuff. I like atmosphere. And so I would read, I loved books that would make you feel like you're in a space, and particularly that is not your own, and that really is immersing you there. And I particularly liked it if it was something, if it was set in the past or set in, like anything, love things like New England and, anything that had strong atmospherics. I like the theater for the same reason. So that's how I ended up on the East Coast. I was like, well, apparently they have a lot of books here and they have a lot of old stuff.
As you were talking about like books that are going to make you feel like you're in a certain time and place, did you ever read, and I know it's fiction, but did you ever read The Alienist by Caleb Carr?
I did. That's a great book. Deserved every award it got.
It was one of those books where I felt like I knew what it was like to be, in New York at that period of time. It was so great. And the follow-up, and the name of that's going to escape me, but I know it was told by the point of view of a different character. Oh, damn it. I
know the book you're talking about, but I can't think of the title either.
Yeah.
It's funny. I remember when I first began writing my first book, The Most Famous Man in America, somebody gave me The Alienist, and they said, "Look, this is how this is how to do it." And it was very intimidating, actually, because, as a kid, I never wanted to be a writer as a young person, because to me, writers were magic. I could not imagine how they could spin an entire world, how they could make you cry or laugh or picture yourself in all kinds of places just from ink on pulped up pieces of wood. And I honestly could not imagine being a magician myself. And so when I began writing my first book, it was clear there was good reason. I wasn't a magician. I didn't know what I was doing. So studying books like The Alienist and other books that do that kind of magical work was a big part of how I figured out how to write nonfiction.
So you never thought of yourself as a magician, but when did you start thinking that, you could make a career out of writing those words that you're hearing?
Well, I came back east to go to school, and then, again, just following the path of least resistance, I enrolled in a PhD program at Yale, just down the road from where I live now, in American Studies. American Studies, the great catch-all category in which you're allowed to do anything you want. So, it was great for me. And I like research. Actually, I like research. That's really the part I liked. So it was perfect because nobody expects you to be a great writer as an academic. I'm sorry to say there are many great writers who are academics, but it's not necessarily a requirement of the job. And I finished my PhD, and my PhD was on the subject of my first book, this fellow named Henry Ward Beecher, a once world famous, but then forgotten minister, a congregational minister, had one of the very first mega churches in the world in Brooklyn Heights, New York, who has been forgotten for good reason. He had a big sex scandal, but if he was remembered at all, it was as the little brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, the great abolitionist novelist. And so I'd written a dissertation, and it was a good dissertation. It was heavy going. My mother read it, and I remember when I sold the book as a trade book, my proposal, she said, "So is this going to be your dissertation?" I said, "Oh no, it's going to be very different." And she literally, I believe, said, "Whew, like, thank God for that," because that had a lot of big words and it wasn't the most interesting to the average reader. So when I finished this dissertation, I finished my PhD. I thought about, of course, going on in my profession. And of course, now I kind of think, why didn't I do that? That would have been I would have tenure. It'd be great. Nobody could ever fire me. That was a stupid decision. But at the time, I enjoyed the work of research and writing more than I enjoyed teaching. Teaching is hard work. And
yes, it is.
Both. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, it is.
Both at the same time, where you're expected to write books and teach, seemed very daunting to me. That was it. I was like, maybe this has a life. Maybe this has a life as a trade book.
Yeah, I always thought I wanted to be a professor, and I was on a PhD. That was my track, to get a PhD in clinical psychology. And I made the decision to take a year off of school after I graduated. And I got a job in advertising. And then I just started making money and never looked back. But I always. Well,
there you go. Never did that myself. Never tried that making money thing. Might have been my mistake.
Well, it wasn't a lot of money. I think I literally was spending more to commute into Manhattan from Connecticut than I was making. I think I was even being paid hourly at that first gig. But I always wondered, because I always dreamed of, being a professor and doing research, because I like you, I love research, and teaching. And last fall, one of my daughters goes to Sacred Heart University here in Connecticut, and they were reaching out to people who work in marketing, and they said, "Hey, we need a teacher for Marketing 101, and would anybody be interested?" And I said, "Oh, you know what? I've always wanted to do that." So I'm like, "Yeah, I'll adjunct for you." So it worked out. I did it. And it was not as fun as I thought it would originally be. 8 a.m. class, Tuesdays and Fridays. Nobody ever showed up 8 a.m. on Friday. I was preaching to an empty choir, if you will.
Wow, really?
But it's also a weird time because everyone's in masks. No one could really hear me because I had to wear a mask, and nobody was even awake at that time. So I'm like, I think I may have made the right career decision, not getting that PhD. I don't know. I'd still like to be Dr. Carlin someday.
Well, there's a lot of psychology in what you do, so
That
it
is
makes
true.
a lot of sense.
That is true. But when you were working on that first book, for which you won the Pulitzer Prize, what did you learn? What did you learn about writing? What did you learn about publishing as you were working on that first book?
Well, they're kind of two different questions, really. I can say I remember when I was first getting together the proposal for that first book and talking to an agent friend of ours and asking his advice. And he says, listen, first thing you got to know, nobody knows anything about book publishing. And I was like, really? Nobody knows? And I have heard that quite a few times since. And I think that was more true in the past where we had fewer analytic tools and less data. And so, but it's still true. Nobody knows exactly what's going to hit the public taste, what's going to make a splash, what people are going to care about. And it's often a big surprise, and sometimes an unpleasant surprise. So publishing, I still feel, is a little bit of a mystery, and only more so now that there are so many competing things for our attention, so many screens. But writing was something different. I will make a confession right away, which is that, so I sold the book pretty easily, too easily, actually. And I was very pleased. I got started on the first book. I wrote about, I think, 2.5, 3 chapters. And it was becoming increasingly clear to me, and it was abundantly clear to the editor when I turned those first 3 chapters in, that I had no idea what I was doing. I knew how to write a great dissertation. I knew how to do great research. I had no idea how to write a book. And that was that. She canceled my contract right then, pretty much right then and there. I mean, it was really... it was really quite a shock. As my agent said, I mean, you didn't even cry when I told you. I said, well, once I did kind of cry in the back, but yes, not in front of anyone. I mean, I was really in shock, like, oh, geez. So I probably would have been discouraged enough to just throw up my hands and go back into academia. But I had been paid in advance, a reasonably good advance, and I had to pay it back. So that meant reselling the book. And so then I figured, well, now I really do have to learn how to write. And that was really a huge process. This was, it was a while ago. The web was not, the internet was not what it is today. All the research, there were not a lot of how-to books for how to write biography or how to write trade history books. As there are lots of fabulous resources now. There weren't even a lot of books on the shelves about how to write biography. So I sat down and I really did some soul searching. Well, what am I doing this for? What is my goal? You could say, oh, my goal is to teach the reader about 19th century America, or my goal is to have something to say about the intersection of religion and sexuality or something. But then I realized, no, it is, I could say my goal is to sell books. And yes, of course, that's true. But to really get down to brass tacks, my goal was to get the reader to read the next sentence, the next paragraph, to turn the page, and God willing, to get to the end of the chapter and to the end of the book. And if that's the case, because that's all that reading really is about, so what is it that makes you read the next sentence? It is wondering what's going to happen next, or what's going to be said next, or wondering why that thing that you just described happened. So I thought, well, okay, that means that's suspense, essentially. How do you create a feeling of suspense that gets people to keep going? So I went to the library and looked up books about how to write thrillers and how to write mysteries, which I knew nothing about. One of my favorite books, I think the title was Action, Conflict, Suspense. And it was about, you need to have conflict to create suspense, and you need to have action that comes into conflict with something thwarting it. And there were a bunch of exercises in this book and in a number of other ones. And I started doing the exercises. What does my protagonist want? What is standing in the way of my protagonist? What is the backstory? What is the climax? Then let's do it all over again. I even read one great essay about how to write pornography, because I mean, who succeeds better in putting ideas in your head than pornographers and moving the reader to action than a pornographer. And so I rewrote the proposal. I rewrote the opening chapters using exactly these exercises. And there was one other really helpful thing that I did was, I call it reverse outlining, and I still do this. I went to the two big bestsellers at the time when I was trying to resell my book, which were Fast Food Nation and Seabiscuit, which are really quite different books, but they were hugely popular nonfiction books at the time. And I thought, well, what are they doing? Especially in that first chapter where they're hooking you, what are they doing? And I would outline it paragraph by paragraph, and not with the substance, but like, first paragraph drops the reader into a scene. Second paragraph introduces the protagonist of the scene. Third paragraph gives you a little backstory. Fourth paragraph introduces the conflicting character, that kind of thing, like an action paragraph outline. And what I discovered was both Fast Food Nation and Seabiscuit were almost exactly the same in their structural outline. So basically, I just copied them. I did that for my first chapter, my opening chapter. And I did it again when I wrote the next book, because it's a very effective way to pull people in right away.
I'm glad that the intersection of, Fast Food Nation and Seabiscuit isn't that, Seabiscuit was sold to McDonald's to be, used as a kind of fast food kind of. Isn't that disgusting? I mean, why do I even think of these things? I don't know. I mean, it's bad enough that I thought it, but then I said it.
Well, I've got to believe he had a hero's death. I've got to guess. I can't remember now.
Let's hope he's not glue somewhere on the shelves in Walmart.
Exactly.
Well, how did you, so you had, obviously some great success with the most famous man in America. What was the time period between that and Madam, and how did you? I mean, I'm assuming, I don't want to assume too much here, but I'm assuming that you had probably a number of different things that you were interested in writing about. I'd also be curious to know how you selected Polly Adler as your subject matter.
Well, you assumed wrong. There was nothing I wanted to write about. And in fact, I was never going to write another book again, because once I got through with The Most Famous Man in America, I felt like a schoolboy who'd studied too long by candlelight and ruined my eyes and, destroyed my health. I was wiped out. I had been so nervous and so anxious the whole time. I was racing, of course, to finish the book in time, which, yes, that's always my way. And I was never going to write another book again. I thought, this is idiotic, and this is a stupid way to make a living. That's a different question. And I was never going to do it again. But then it went so well. I was flattered. Oh, look, apparently I'm good at this. And I think I don't have any children, but I have the feeling that it's not unlike having kids, that when you first have that baby, you're like, well, that was crazy, not doing that again. And then you forget because the kids are so nice. And so that was really what it was like. And about a year after the book came out, I was strutting around, feeling flattered, feeling good about myself. And I thought, well, why not? Why not at least think about it? And this was probably a big mistake in one sense. Why not? Why didn't I stick with what I already knew? I have no idea why. Why not another nice book about someone in the 19th century? Or as my husband said, how about a president? President's book sells. What, you could pick one, just any of them, try not to do another Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, but, maybe even those guys, they still sell. But instead, I thought, where would I want to take, if I could take a time machine, because that's what I always felt like books books can do. They're like time machines. They can take you someplace that you never knew. And I thought, if I were going to take a time machine, where would I want it to be? And I thought, well, of course, the 1920s, the Jazz Age, the flappers, the gangsters, the Great Gatsby, all the Lost Generation, all the parties, all that sort of thing. And I thought, well, why don't I just look? And so I was in the stacks of the Yale Library, looking through the 1920s books, and I saw this little red volume, kind of scarlet red, and I have no idea why I picked it out, except the color red, I guess. And it was this memoir by a woman I had never heard of, a woman named Polly Adler, who was, it turns out, the most famous madam of the early 20th century, maybe the entire 20th century. And she had ghost written this fabulous memoir, and it was clearly whitewashed. Obviously, she couldn't tell a lot of things, but it had a fabulous cast of characters. She seemed to know everybody. She was a little like my first subject, the Forrest Gump of the 19th century. She was a little like the Forrest Gump of the Jazz Age. And I thought, foolishly, I suppose, although I was right about this, is I thought, there's enough here already, just with this book. If I can see what's in the newspapers, if I can find anything about it and I can contextualize it, I'll have enough to have a nice, tidy little, perhaps a quick book. I was right that there was a lot of material. I was wrong that it was going to be quick.
How long did it take you to write it?
Now you're embarrassing me. It took 13 years. It was stupid. That's the problem with winning the Pulitzer Prize. I got a little bit yelled at, but I didn't get really yelled at the way I would have otherwise. Nobody threatened to cancel my contract or anything like that, which was too bad, because I indulged my love of research. And I partially blame Polly. She was fascinating, and she left a crazy paper trail. It turns out that if you are just a nice, respectable lady who stays home and keeps your nose clean, and you don't necessarily leave a lot of paper behind, unless you keep diaries and extensive letters, which most people nowadays don't. But if you're in the criminal world, in the underworld, especially if you're famous, I found all kinds of records, FBI files, legal papers, tons of newspaper reportage. She became famous and was in all the gossip columns. And then I had a couple truly wonderful discoveries. One was that she had been a pack rat. She wanted to be famous. She wanted to be remembered. So there was a cache of some of her memorabilia, photograph albums and some letters. A lot of it had been thrown away by her brother, who was ashamed of her after she died. I still harbor tremendous resentment towards Sam Adler. And I also found, this was the really crowning thing, was the papers of her ghostwriter, a brilliant woman named Virginia Faulkner. And that had a lot of the secret stuff.
Well, if her brother did keep all that stuff, it might have added 3 or 4 years to your research timeline. You would have upset more people.
Or it could have leapfrogged me, and then I wouldn't have had to look so hard. The problem was the problem and the blessing. I sound like I'm complaining, and I am complaining because that was my middle age, man. I could have done something with my middle age. Maybe I should have had children, but it was like it was addictive, because every week there would be something new that would come out. I would find one thing that would, because we live in the golden age of digitalization and the golden age of the internet, where things are being unearthed all the time. So I would get every week at least one great new hit, one great new bit of research that would send me down a different direction. And that really was how I'm a research addict.
Well, as you were putting the story of her life together, doing all of your research, it's really a puzzle you're kind of putting together, because you're getting it from all these disparate sources. What surprised you the most about her life, or dare I even say, like, what inspired you the most by her life?
When you write these kind of books, I'm sure other authors have told you this, when you spend a long time, especially in biography, but with anyone writing about them, you have to be broad-minded, because you're going to see everyone's warts, everyone's odd peccadillos. But you also have to kind of like them. And I liked Polly. I liked Henry Ward Beecher also. They had a lot of similarities. They very broad-minded, great senses of humor, intelligent, and loved education, although neither of them had as much education as they would have liked. The kind of great senses of humor about the world and about themselves, and a great understanding of human nature. And I really appreciated that about them. But on the other hand, when you're looking at all these broad-minded people doing amoral things, more of Polly's story, there were a lot of shocking things. One thing, I literally could spend an hour talking about all the shocking things, although I am no longer easily shocked. I'll tell you that much, after spending that much time in the world of prostitution and hypocrisy. One thing was the extent to which police departments, especially vice squads, really were quite corrupt by the standards of the day. That it was hard. I never really stopped being shocked by policing in the past. I don't know about today, but it was very interesting to think about how police departments worked or didn't work in the past, and how that leads us to where we are today with a lot of the controversies. But probably the biggest one was when I was speaking to an elderly man who had known Polly in his 20s, and he said out of the blue that she had once said to him, quite out of the blue, it seemed to him, that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had been one of her customers, one of the most beloved presidents in American history. And that one, I had never heard that rumor. I knew she had entertained a lot of politicians, that they were some of her best and biggest clients, but that was a big one.
It makes me wonder why he was really in the wheelchair.
Well, so, as biographers, you basically are a peeping Tom. I mean, you spend all your time going through other people's drawers and reading their private letters. And so I spent that alone, probably added 6 to 9 months of research, so she told him this at the end of her life, or very close to the end of her life. She was already suffering from the cancer that would kill her. She had a cigarette hanging out of her mouth for about 40 years. So, a lot of people that went early then. And she had been feeling very humiliated because her memoir manuscript had been turned down by every publisher in New York. And her parents, who she brought over from Russia, where she had come from, she had basically supported them her whole life on her ill-gotten gains. But her parents, nonetheless, would take her money, as she said to this nice young man, but would not have her at the holiday table. They wouldn't have her for the Passover Seder. They wouldn't have her for any of the high holy days, because they felt she was profane. And this clearly hurt her feelings terribly. So she was in a moment where she was brooding. She was sick. Her life was coming close to an end. I think she felt like nobody's ever going to know how central I was to so many secret stories and so many powerful men. And so I didn't have any way to confirm this independently. So I had to go look, could Franklin Delano Roosevelt have sex? Turns out, yes. What really was he that he suffered from? They don't think it's polio, actually. What was his attitude towards women? And we now know quite a bit more about that he did have extramarital affairs. It turns out he also loved stag parties, with what we would call now strippers, nude dancers, and cards and booze and all that. He even threw stag parties every year for his birthday in the White House. And the moment where I found the eminently respectable newspaper publisher Dorothy Schiff being quoted as saying in her own memoir that she was talking to FDR's doctor, and the doctor says, she asks, I don't know quite why she asked, but she asks, can he have sex? And he says, oh yes, remember, only his legs are paralyzed. And she says, well, because this is, the 30s, she's fairly naive. And she says, well, but then, how does he do it, essentially? And he says, well, in the French manner. And so please pardon me if this offends your listeners. Well, you have to know enough about prostitution, as I did by that point, to know that when you say in the French manner, you mean fellatio. And so at that time, very few, if we use the word respectable women, that was not an act that was part of the average married person's life. That was something that only prostitutes did for the most part. And so, and there were other things. There were many other reasons to think that it absolutely could have happened. Not just the sex stuff. There were other structural things and other networking things. But I never was able to really prove it. I do think it's certainly possible, and it's even maybe likely.
I think just about Polly, just to get off of FDR. Apparently, many people were on FDR who knew.
You just set that up, didn't you?
Well, I can't help myself sometimes. But to move away from FDR, is Polly's story? I mean, is it an American dream story? I mean, you've got this, Russian immigrant comes over alone, if my memory is correct, doesn't have anything to her name, and then works her way up to, a bit of notoriety. Obviously not all, notoriety isn't necessarily positive. But I mean, is it an American dream story or no?
Well, she thought it was. She says quite clearly it could be a classic American success story, from $3 a week as a $5 a week as a garment factory worker to making $10 a trick. Well, she doesn't really put it that way, but a better address, a mink coat, Park Avenue. She retires quite beautifully. She's not rich, but she's quite comfortable, in part, actually, she said, because she was being paid regularly by Democratic operatives for her silence about Roosevelt. See, hard to get away from him. I think she felt like not just had she achieved financial success, she had made herself a somebody. And in particular, this is probably what was most important to her at the end. She knew she had become somebody in the underworld and in the shadowy world, but she couldn't really be acknowledged that way. And she also was well aware that if she left that shadowy world, she would not be welcomed, as she said, as the reformed madam, I'll be a pariah, but as Madam Polly, the proprietress of the most opulent bordello in the United States, society comes to me. So it was very important to her that she write this memoir. This memoir to her was the thing that she felt redeemed her and made her a person who you could respect. Now, I'm not sure everyone did respect her, but it is certainly true that when she died, Time magazine calls her a literary lion. And as many a reporter observed, if you want to buff up your obituary, no matter how many women you corrupted, how many cops you corrupted, write a best-selling book, and what will your obituary say? It will say author dies.
I'm just curious because, you mentioned not really knowing anything about her, and you stumble upon this red book, which in my mind, it should be a black book, but that's another story. But, you stumbled across this red book in the Yale Library, and you didn't really have too much knowledge of who she was. And I imagine,
None.
Not many people did either. But I'm thinking about this time period in which, she was kind of coming up and operating, the Roaring 20s, Prohibition. We all know Al Capone. We all know Meyer Lansky. We all know all these big, romanticized figures of the underworld. Why don't we know Polly Adler?
Yeah, and especially because those were her friends. Those were the people she collaborated with. She spoke very warmly of Lucky Luciano. She said she refused to use Meyer Lansky's name in her book because she says, "I like the guy. I don't want to get him in trouble." She knew Al Capone quite well. He came to her house many times. I think I think there's two reasons. I think that it's part of the conspiracy of silence around sexuality is precisely that double standard that she was taking advantage of to make her living, which was, there are good women and there are bad women. That was certainly the attitude. And I'm sure there are people who still believe that. And as one of my informants said, good women and bad women, you marry the first and you try to lay as many of the second as you possibly can. And never the twain shall meet, and also the double standard of that you can. Well, they used to say, you can do anything you want, you just can't talk about it in front of a lady. And or as I heard one great line was somebody who said, what is it to be a gentleman is to always pay your gambling debts and never let your mistress and your wife meet. And that was really the attitude. And I think that there's still some part of it that we like the idea of an outlaw. I don't know why we like the idea of an outlaw who's basically a sociopath who will, kill people, but we do. We love our gangsters in America, but we feel a little grossed out by women using sexuality as a tool against the world, or as a tool to make their living, or as any intersection of sex and money, especially when women are involved, really bothers us. And so I think that's one thing. People loved that book, but they did not usually like to keep it on their shelves once they read it. As one drugstore clerk said, people come and they buy that book all the time, but it's always for their friends. And then I think the other thing is that, we love The Great Gatsby. We all have to read The Great Gatsby in high school, right? And why do we like it? Besides the fact that it's short, it is glamorous. Even if he dies in the end, it is glamorous.
He dies?
Sorry,
I'm so close to finishing that book. And you got to go and do that to me.
It's not pretty. But, we love the idea of all that ill-gotten wealth. We love the idea of the parties and the glamour. But no, I often have thought of Polly by the end of the book as Jay Gatsby's party planner. You think he knew how to get all that, all that liquor into the house, all that dirty laundry and dirty dishes. So that what she was the person who was behind the glamour, who made it happen, who really created the machinery and ran the machinery of the American dream. And we don't like to look at the dreary mechanics behind the curtain. And I think it's a really hard sell. Hey, let me tell you about this wonderful, glamorous era, and let me show you the underbelly of the underbelly.
So what's next? Is this the last book you're going to write, Debbie, or are we going to do another one? Not we in the sense of you and me, but
we and my royal we self. I have to say you are catching me at a moment where I am feeling fully tuckered out. I do not have an idea in my head. As I say, I read the New York Times, trying to catch up on Netflix. I have not it was too much. I overinvested. The book is selling and people like the book. So I'm pleased by that. But at the same time, I think, how could it possibly be worth 14 years of my life? It's not actually a child. On the other hand, I'll change my mind if Netflix does buy the rights and make it into a movie. And then I'll be like, oh, let's do that again. I'm not going to hold my breath. But we'll see. I have worn myself out, and this time it's not like a 19th century schoolboy. This time it's like somebody who went on a bender, a good 1920s bender, and has woken up and discovered the crash has come, and I've got to dry out, man.
Well, when your child is a 14-year-old book, you don't have to send it to college, and there are some benefits to that because I've got 3 in college right now, and it's it's fun. It's lots of fun. I think I
hope this podcasting thing is really paying off because that's no small thing.
Well, my kids are eating ramen and so am I. So we'll pivot from the hard questions for a moment. And I'll go to my I call them the hot seat questions, but they're really not in the hot seat. Although some are easier for certain people to answer than others, which is interesting to me. So first up, favorite TV show when you were a kid, what was it?
Oh my gosh. Oh, you should have prepared me. Favorite TV show.
And this is so interesting to me because, I've talked to a few filmmakers and they can rattle stuff off like quickly. When I talk to authors, they have a hard time talking about their favorite TV show. And I don't know why that is, or just name one TV show.
Well,
I'll tell you.
Enjoy. Okay. So I will reveal my age right here and now. So we probably watched in my house, because it was back in the day when there were like 4 channels. We were not early on the cable bandwagon, I can tell you that much. So of course, if I wasn't sitting in front of the TV at 3 o'clock, I don't know where I would possibly have been. So it's not like I didn't watch TV. I will not say Gilligan's Island though. But so I would say we watched, probably the thing I remember best is watching Little House on the Prairie. And I still have a lot of ideas probably that I gleaned from that. But perhaps my strongest TV memory is begging my parents, begging them to let me watch Love Boat. And my parents being like, why do you want to watch Love Boat? And I remember thinking, what a preposterous question. Why would I want to watch Love Boat? I mean, it's obvious. And
Gavin MacLeod.
Yeah.
You got who played Doc? Oh God,
it's Gavin MacLeod. No, Gavin MacLeod.
Gavin MacLeod was Captain Steubings.
Yes. Right.
Then he had Fred Granby as Gopher.
Yes.
Isaac.
Julie
Isaac,
McCoy, the bartender. Yes.
Julie McCoy. Isaac right. Was I used to know all their names. So I'm glad you said Love Boat because it brings back a memory. I grew up in South Florida, late 70s, mid 70s, early 80s. And we used to play Love Boat. We did. So our little group of friends, me, Mario Turco, whenever we played anything, had to be the lead. So he had to be Captain Steubings. He had to be Luke Skywalker. I mean, that was Mario.
Was Mario. He a good Luke Skywalker, though?
He was good Luke. He was a good Luke. Good Luke. I was Gopher. I was Gopher. My brother.
He was a fan favorite.
Oh, you gotta love Gopher. He was your comedic relief. My twin brother, I have a twin brother, Jimmy, was Doc.
Oh,
Jimmy was Doc.
Very nice.
Christine Cuesta. Hope you don't mind me saying your name, Christine. She was Julie McCoy.
And she must have been perky.
She was very perky, still is to this day. It's funny, like we grew up in Florida, and then I ran into her at my brother's liquor store in Greenwich, Connecticut. And, it turns out she had moved up here to Connecticut and we all reconnected. It's fun.
That's a reverse migration coming up to Connecticut.
It's the wrong way to go if you're asking me. But
so did you find that love didn't hurt anymore?
Oh, no, it didn't hurt. It didn't hurt to begin with. I just let it go and it came back to me. It is life's sweetest reward. If I'm being honest with you, Debbie, it's life's sweetest reward. And poor Armando. So Mario's little brother, Armando, we made him be Isaac. We made him do this. He had to give us the guns because we also made him be R2-D2 when we played Star Wars because he was like the smallest of us. We used to make him go beep, beep, beep.
That's what you get when you're the little brother. You're just happy to be included.
That's it. No, but it's funny. Like I started rewatching Love Boat when we were in lockdown in the pandemic. From season 1. Well, I don't want to talk about where I got the episodes of Love Boat because Polly Adler may have had something to do with it. No, it was say a friend was a technologically savvy friend. Helped me find every single episode of Love Boat.
I will leave it at that.
The early seasons are good, but the later ones are not. I mean, there's only so much chara you can take in a given year. You know? All right, so that's our first one. So Love Boat. We're going to give you Love Boat. I'll acknowledge Little House on the Prairie. But we're going to
age appropriate.
Yeah, well, okay, but Paul playing the fiddle is great. You're in New Haven. Favorite pizza place in New Haven? What is it?
I'm of the newer bandwagon. I am a fan of modern pizza.
Oh, modern pizza.
It's only 30 years old. And the lines are usually a tiny little bit less long. But I am a big fan of, may I just say, deeply fried eggplant. That's it. That did not know that eggplant on pizza, but it has to be crispy.
Got to be crispy. And, there's good eggplant, bad eggplant out there. My mother, who's 100% Italian, she's got a secret: only use a male eggplant, never female eggplant, because you don't want the seeds.
How do you tell?
It has to do with the roundness of the bottom of the eggplant. And then you have to peel it, slice it, and get all the water out. Yeah. There's a whole process to eggplant. My favorite, not that you asked, but my favorite pizza place is actually not in New Haven. It's in East Haven. Tolly's a pizza.
Say it again.
Tolly's.
All right.
Yeah, it's a little hidden gem in East Haven.
I will take that seriously, and we'll go there. That sounds great. I need something new here.
I mean, it's certainly not fancy, but I had a client. We were driving home from Boston, and he made me pull over in East Haven to take him to Tolly's because he grew up over there and he wanted it. So
thank you for that suggestion.
Sure, anytime. All right, question number 3. How do you feel when you're staring either at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen, depending on how you write, with the intention of writing something?
Maybe it would be a good time to go get a drink. That just you never know. Sometimes a reward at the beginning helps. That's another reason it took so long. That when that happened, I mean, I'm a big fan of outlining. I have to say. So the more I outline, that you can kind of ease yourself in. I also have. I'm a big fan of keeping chronologies. All my notes go into a single chronology. It's like 3,000 pages. It has to be split up because the document can't be that big. So a lot of times when I would be in that moment of, for heaven's sakes, I got to start something new, blank page, I would eventually just lose myself in my chronology and kind of massage myself out into writing something, cut and paste, and then see if I can put it together into something.
All right. Another profession you would like to try if you decided to give up on doing what you're doing now? Not that I'm recommending you do that, but what's another profession that you think you'd like to try?
Well, you are really catching me at a moment. As I say, I am having a little bit, besides my catching up on my Netflix and reading the newspaper, I am really having a little bit of an identity crisis because I'm good at writing, but I don't think of myself as a writer. And so I've been thinking, well, if I did something else, what would it be? And I have desiccated my imagination. I mean, the pandemic didn't help either, but that I feel like I've been thinking, what would I do? And in the old days, I would have said, if I had had a choice, I would have loved to be, these are not big name professions. I would have loved to be an art critic, or I would have loved to be a dramaturg, someone who helps directors think through their plays. Both of which clearly are I'm clearly more passive than active in this situation. But now I think both of those might as well be writing. So, and nobody's offering me the opportunity. So really, I am open to suggestions from any of your listeners.
Oh, I've got a suggestion for you. What about Madam?
It turns out they work really hard, and it's kind of a young person's game. You can see Polly retires when she's about 45, and there's good reason. Things are changing. Now you don't have to go to a prostitute to get laid. You can maybe even have sex with your fiance, that sort of thing. But I think it's also that when you get older, it's not so easy to be up at 5 a.m. and fielding phone calls, and you get a little tired of it. There's a fair amount of repetition in the game, actually, it turns out.
I know you don't consider yourself a writer, so I'll kind of rephrase how I was going to ask this question, but what's the best piece of advice you would give to an aspiring biographer?
It's insane. You might be better off trying your hand at something shorter. Biography is notoriously large and baggy and difficult to get your hands around. Biographers are also notorious for missing their deadlines and writing big, thick bricks of books, and that would be me on both counts. So you really have to want to be in that world. So my first thought is, boy, don't do it. But if you are going to do it, you got to be unfit for other things. But the other thing is, real problem with biography writing is you get lost. You would think a life would be narrower than like a historical period or some other kind of writing. But in fact, a life expands out. You have a million moments, and you have to decide which are the moments that are really going to matter. And so it's easy to also, when you're a biographer, you also fall in love with, if not fall in love with your subject per se, you fall in love with everything about it. So you want to include everything you found. So the biggest piece of advice is you want to write a shapely book that a reader is going to want to write. And that means you got to cut all the stuff that you love, and you got to study how to write a suspenseful arc. And that's my real advice.
And pornography, apparently.
You know what? All five senses, endow it with it. This was the advice. All right. So here's my good advice for biographers. This is what it said. And the reason it stood out in particular was the example they used. The woman in the example was named Elvira. A good name, but you don't hear very often. So Elvira stood there naked and trembling, and so you try to get all five senses: trembling, and I don't know, smelling of fear, I guess, or something. You try to, and whimpering. I don't know what she was scared. That was the example, and so you use all five senses to try to create a picture. And once you have set that picture for a moment, then you endow that picture with emotions. She was standing there trembling and cold, breathing heavily, and feeling afraid. And then you start the action. And obviously that's very formulaic, but it really does work when you're stuck to think, well, what is the picture I'm trying to create in my reader's head? What is the emotion that they can relate to or care about or wonder about? And then what happens?
So for our last one, we're going to take a trip back in time. We're going to get into our DeLorean. We're going to hit 88 miles an hour. And we're going to allow you to give a handwritten letter to your younger self. You could pick what age you'd want to give this letter to. But what I'm curious about is, what would you say? What would you write to your younger self in a letter if you could deliver it to them?
Wow, that is a great question, and I have never been asked that. And you didn't prepare me. Let's see. Well, of course, if you'd asked me at any other time, might have had a different suggestion. I think the fact that I feel right now that I'm in a bit of an identity crisis, and I am at a career crossroads. And one of the things I am feeling a little bad about is that, when you work for 14 years on something, no matter how much you get paid, it prorates at a very low rate. Right. And I feel kind of guilty because my husband he's been, working real hard for the last 14 years. So there's part of me that feels like I wish that I had prepared more to be able to pivot financially. Like I feel guilty that right this moment, I am wondering, hey, if I want to contribute to the family till, what would I do? And I know I certainly know I can, and I certainly know I could have. That would have been good reason to be a professor. I'd still be getting paid. And so there's a little part of me that I think would go back to myself not as a kid, maybe as I was making the decision to move into this business of writing, to say, well, keep always a second track going in your head, which doesn't necessarily mean a plan B, although maybe that, but just some, I don't know. I think that's it, that I feel like that is financial independence is always the thing you want. And especially if you're a woman and you have not necessarily been brought up to be like, listen, you got to work. It's something it's something I'm thinking about a lot right now.
There you go. Well, the book is The Biography of Polly Adler, Icon of the Jazz Age. The author is Debby Applegate. Debby, where can people buy the book if they wanted to pick it up after listening to this podcast?
Well, first of all, if you do, thank you very much. Second of all, if you do, and be aware, it's not necessarily for your grandmother, but you can find it anywhere. It actually is for sale everywhere. That's the glory of the internet and most bookstores, I hope, and it's actually selling. So that's something. So please do if you can. And also, there are many good libraries. I'm a big fan of the public library.
Libraries, and I always like to endorse the old independently owned small bookstores if you can. And Debby, if people wanted to follow you or learn more about you, do you have a website? Do you have social media handles that you'd like to throw out there?
Well, I have indeed joined the 21st century. It's taken me, it was a little late. I have a website under debbyapplegate.com. I do post pretty regularly. There's a Facebook, Polly Adler, the book, and I have been posting on Instagram, which I've been trying. I have a million wonderful photos of Polly and her milieu, and she's got many great scandals. Right now, March was a big month for her. Many tough things happened for her in March. So if you go to Debby Applegate at Instagram, the one thing I feel like I have not yet really plunged into is Twitter, because it seems to me Twitter can take over your life.
I have been known to refer to it as a cesspool because it's just, you can go down rabbit holes and just get angry. Like I've never gone through my Twitter feed and not gotten angry about something. So I try to avoid it at all costs. But.
Oh, that's interesting, because I only subscribe to people who seem nice. And so I don't want any, I don't want.
It's not the people you subscribe to. It's the people who are leaving comments and sort of adding to their threads. Who just start to flame out, these keyboard warriors who troll others. It's
well, I didn't join Twitter until after the Trump era, so I'm hoping that will that'll save me some anguish. Although who knows? We're in World War III now, so potentially maybe none of this will matter.
Well, maybe not. But Debby, thank you so much. It's a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.